Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the international edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 7 important articles for a detailed analysis. These topics are relevant for our mains and prelims examination. The first 3 articles require a detailed analysis as they are important for both mains and prelims. And we have few smaller articles that are important for the prelims examination. So let's analyze all these articles one by one, and this will be a comprehensive discussion so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. If you guys are liking our initiatives, do support us by pressing the like button, do share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So before we start, we have a very important announcement. On 14th of April, we will be conducting Unacademy All India Prelims mock test. And this will give you an opportunity to attempt UPSC standard question paper for both general studies and CSAT. And these questions are set by our expert faculties. So do register for the test by using the link provided in the video description. So let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at this important column from page number 10. This column is dealing with the topic of space debris. The article is referring to a recent mission of ISRO and how ISRO avoided contributing to space debris and how ISRO ensured that it was a zero-orbital debris mission. So let's dive deep into this topic as it is very important for science and technology, both for your prelims and mains. There are many important issues to discuss and concepts to cover under this particular topic. So the context is that one of ISRO's recent mission, the XPOSAT mission, it was launched in January 2024 at the start of this year. So in this mission, the ISRO or the Indian Space Research Organization ensured that the mission would not contribute any space debris. Through better utilization of the spent rocket stage, ISRO ensured that it would be a zero-orbital debris mission, and thus India has played a significant role in mitigating the risks associated with space debris. So let's first understand what is space debris. How do we classify it? What threat does it pose for space exploration and space safety? And then we'll look at some global initiatives and Indian initiatives to remove space debris and mitigate space debris. And then finally, we'll talk about the XPOSAT mission and how ISRO ensured that this would be a zero debris mission. Space debris essentially refers to any space junk or space waste which is contributed during space missions. Whenever a rocket is launched into outer space, either into low Earth orbit or even into the geostationary orbit, and when satellites and spacecrafts are placed in these orbits, a lot of waste material is junked or dumped into the outer space. Now, these objects can be very large objects which are of no use, no purpose. It could be an entire defunct satellite, or it could be a large component left behind by the spent stage of a rocket, or it could be very small, minute fragments created during a rocket launch and during a satellite or payload injection. It could be paint fragments from the rocket stage, or it could be very small bits of metal. It could be just few or few centimeters in size, right? So all these objects and materials that we are leaving behind in space, they are classified as space debris or as space junk, also known as space waste. So today, there are thousands of such objects moving in a certain orbit around the Earth, especially in the low Earth orbit. You can see over here how this region is crowded out by thousands of waste objects that are floating around in space. in the low Earth orbit, which extends from around 100 kilometers from the Earth's surface all the way till 2000 kilometers above the Earth's surface. So in this low Earth orbit, there are thousands of waste material and particles floating around, and the problem is they move at incredible speeds. They will be orbiting the Earth at very high speeds of thousands of kilometers per hour, and essentially every small fragment is a projectile. So if it strikes another satellite, or if it strikes with another piece of space debris, it will result in a violent explosion, creating even more space debris. Essentially, this could trigger a domino effect, a chain reaction, which eventually could render space exploration unviable, at least for a long period of time. Because these objects that we are dumping and leaving behind in outer space, they remain over there for several months, several years, or in some cases, they can remain there for hundreds of years as well. Even in geostationary orbit, which is around 36,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, even in geostationary orbit, where communication satellites are usually placed, there are hundreds of waste material and objects that have been dumped by our space missions. So this is what we refer to as space junk or space debris. So please note down that most of the space debris is concentrated in the low Earth orbit, between 100 to 2000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. This is where we find thousands of man-made objects which have been junked or dumped during space missions. Even in the geostationary orbit, there are few hundred space junk or space debris material that has been left behind by previous missions. Now let's understand which country has been the biggest contributor as far as space debris is concerned. Because today space agencies, they all have programs to track space debris, to monitor and categorize them. Because every small object or even a big object left behind poses a significant threat for future launches and even for existing missions which are in orbit. The satellites which are in orbit, the International Space Station, the telescopes that have been deployed, right? They all face a constant threat because of these fast-moving projectiles that we have left behind in orbit. Even for future missions, it could be a manned spaceflight program or future rocket launches that are placing satellites and critical missions in orbit. They all have to maneuver around the space debris and avoid a direct collision with these waste objects. So this significantly increases the cost and the risk associated with space exploration. So there are thousands of such waste objects floating around in orbit, and according to various studies and reports, Russia is the biggest contributor as of today. Russian space program, since the days of the Soviet era, has approximately contributed to around 7,000 notable objects which are left behind in space, which are considered as a major risk. After Russia, it is US and China, which also have contributed thousands of known objects that are part of space debris today. If you look at India, India's contribution is very minimal. As of 2022, there were around 114 known objects left behind by ISRO's space program. So all this data has been brought out through a study conducted by NASA. The American Space Agency has a Space Debris Program Office. It has established a dedicated program office to monitor orbital debris or space debris. So this program of NASA constantly monitors and tracks these objects and maintains a database as well to ensure that we can deflect the space debris in the future, or at least avoid a direct collision with these objects. So according to the report published by NASA in 2022, the Orbital Debris Quarterly News, there were at least 25,000 plus space debris objects in low Earth orbit. These are objects above 10 centimeters in size at least, and some of them are very large objects as well, including components left behind by satellites, defunct satellites, or some of the components of a spent fuel stage of a rocket. So such large objects also have been left behind which continue to orbit the Earth, and there are many small objects as well. So it doesn't even take into account the other minute fragments like small scraps of metal or small pieces of paint which might have fallen off. So if you take these smaller objects into account, then the space debris volume goes up exponentially. Essentially, we have crowded out outer space. There is a major traffic problem in outer space. So managing the space debris, avoiding a direct collision with the debris, is a priority for space-faring countries around the world. So this essentially increases the cost of space exploration because satellites, rockets have to evade and they have to carry out maneuvers to avoid a direct impact with the known space debris objects, which means they have to burn more fuel. They have to burn their onboard thrusters to maneuver around these objects sometimes. They have to carefully plan the orbital slots. So because of space debris, which has been unscientifically handled by all the spacefaring countries, the risk is increasing day by day. Now, if you look at India, even though India's contribution is very minimal to space debris compared to US or China or Russia, India did make a big contribution in 2019 when India tested its anti-satellite weapon. According to NASA's report, the space debris from ISRO space program saw a spike in 2019. There was a sudden spike in the number of space debris objects created by Indian space program in 2019 because of an anti-satellite weapon test conducted by India. But after that, the debris levels from India has gone down. It has gone back to 2018 levels. So essentially, militarization of outer space, particularly ASAT weapons test or anti-satellite weapons test, significantly contributes to space debris. In 2019, India carried out Mission Shakti. It was a joint mission of ISRO and DRDO to test India's anti-satellite weapon. A modified ballistic missile was used to target a defunct Indian satellite to display India's anti-satellite weapon capabilities. It marked India's entry into space warfare as well. India became the 4th country in the world to prove its ASAT capabilities after US, Russia, and China. But India was criticized for carrying out the test because for several years there was a kind of a moratorium on anti-satellite weapon testing because these explosions that are carried out as a result of weapons testing contributes enormous amount of debris and waste. So India faced criticism as well after Mission Shakti because the explosion that was caused by the test, it contributed to hundreds of waste objects that continue to float around in outer space. But of course, it's not just India which should be blamed for this. Even the other powers, US, Russia, and China, they are also directly responsible for militarization of outer space. They have conducted frequent ASAT tests like India in the previous years, and even they have contributed significantly for space debris. But this is not about the blame game. It's not about who's responsible for what, because this is a global challenge. It's a global problem that affects all of humanity. Space debris is indeed a major risk for the future of space exploration. It even threatens the existing missions and objects that we have stationed in space. As you all know, today's satellites and various spacecrafts that we have stationed, right, they are critical for a country's security, a country's economy as well. Right from communication satellites to navigation satellites to even remote sensing and other climate study or research satellites which are placed in orbit. They all serve a specific purpose. They contribute immensely for our scientific understanding, for our economy, for our national security as well. So all these space assets are at great risk because of the increasing volume of space debris in the low Earth orbit and also in the geostationary orbit. The biggest danger is that there could be a collision. There could be a collision with existing satellites and existing payloads that have been inserted and these objects could be knocked out because of space debris. The other risk is that these objects left behind, they could undergo an uncontrolled deorbiting, because these objects may not remain in orbit forever. Gradually, over a period of few months or few years or few decades, they will undergo a deorbiting, they will lose their orbit gradually, and they will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. Small objects, they usually burn up in the Earth's atmosphere itself due to friction, due to the high temperature that is generated during the re-entry phase. But larger objects might survive and they might crash into Earth as well. For example, recently there was an incident in the United States just a few days ago. I think it was in March. One of the battery pellets used in International Space Station had been disposed by the ISS crew. This battery pellet, it re-entered the Earth's atmosphere. It survived the re-entry phase and crashed into a house in Florida and destroyed the roof of the house. A few people were injured as well. So such risks are also present, where uncontrolled descent, uncontrolled deorbiting of these objects could pose a risk on ground as well. So it's very, very important to deal with space debris, to manage the waste in a scientific and rational manner. Because right now, satellite operators, space agencies, they are incurring a huge cost. They are putting a lot of time and effort to avoid such collisions by maneuvering their missions around the space debris. Be it NASA, ISRO, or other major space agencies, they all have a tracking program where they track some of the largest waste objects in space. They monitor them, they categorize them, and for every mission, they plan in such a way that they will avoid any direct collision with the space debris objects. So this requires additional time and effort. It increases the cost of operating these missions. There have been many instances where satellites and even the International Space Station have been maneuvered away from their path to avoid a head-on collision with some of the larger waste objects. So this significantly poses a risk for space exploration and space safety as well. So this is where you should understand a syndrome called the Kessler syndrome. It's named after American astrophysicist Donald Kessler, who proposed this theory in 1978. He pointed out that if we keep contributing to space debris, someday we will reach a point of no return. Meaning we will reach a point where the space waste will become so enormous that it will initiate a domino effect, a chain reaction, where one minute fragment, imagine a hypothetical scenario, where one minute fragment left behind collides with a larger space object and it results in an explosion. So that releases thousands of new space debris objects. They continue to orbit the Earth and they will strike with other larger objects. So if this chain reaction continues within a short period of time, we might look at a doomsday scenario where almost every satellite, every payload we have could be wiped out, including the telescopes and the International Space Station as well. There could be a scenario where rocket launches in the future might become completely unviable because the low Earth orbit could be crowded out with space debris because of this predicted chain reaction which could get triggered once we reach this critical mass. So this is called the Kessler syndrome, proposed by Donald Kessler. So now the priority is to avoid this worst case scenario. This is a worst case scenario which has been proposed, right? So to avoid this, we need to focus on mitigation strategies. We have to design our space program in such a way that we have to contribute as less space debris as possible, right? With better design, with better engineering, with better materials being used, we can ensure that some missions can be zero debris missions, like the recent mission of ISRO. And also there are programs that are tracking these objects, and there are strategies being developed around the world to remove and clear the space debris as well. So there are various technologies being tested out to either physically remove the space debris or use other technologies to deflect these debris objects away from the path and to carry out a controlled deorbiting. So let's look at some of these initiatives. Let's look at the global initiatives that have been taken up, and then I will talk about the Indian initiatives. At the global level, an intergovernmental forum was established in 1993 so that the space agencies of all the concerned countries can coordinate with each other. This forum is called the IADC, Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee. It includes the space agencies of all the major spacefaring nations, from India's ISRO to US NASA, the European Space Agency, right? The Japanese Space Exploration Agency, JAXA. So all the major spacefaring nations are part of it. It's an intergovernmental forum that brings their official or state space agencies together. So it's a coordinating platform. They have come out with a set of guidelines as well for space debris management. It's called the Space Debris Mitigation Guidelines of 2002. These guidelines were endorsed by the United Nations as well in 2007. Please note this down. It's very, very important for your prelims. So there is a set of international guidelines brought out by the IADC, which is an intergovernmental forum, and these guidelines have been endorsed by the United Nations as well. But however, there is no specific international law or convention that deals with space debris. We only have a set of guidelines brought out by the IADC, which has been endorsed by the United Nations. Other than that, the UN has established the COPUS, Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, as part of the Outer Space Treaty, which essentially clamps down on the militarization and misuse of outer space. The Outer Space Treaty lays down a set of regulatory guidelines as far as space exploration is concerned, but it doesn't explicitly prohibit militarization of outer space. So it does prohibit deployment of nuclear weapons and nuclear testing in outer space and on celestial bodies, but it doesn't explicitly prohibit other military activities, including ballistic missiles and anti-satellite weapons. But the UN, which is concerned about the misuse of outer space and the space debris problem, it has set up a committee to focus on the peaceful uses of outer space, which also has come out with a set of guidelines to mitigate the problem of space debris. Then the European Space Agency has recently launched the Clean Space Initiative. So under the initiative, European Space Agency with its partners is developing various technologies through which space debris can be removed, can be cleared. NASA is also working on similar technologies, and India is also not far behind. There are few Indian initiatives taken up by ISRO to contain the problem posed by space debris. Couple of years ago, in 2022, ISRO established the System for Safe and Sustainable Operations Management, IS4OM, to continuously monitor space debris objects, particularly in the low Earth orbit. As these objects pose a direct threat to our future missions and existing assets in outer space, ISRO has set up a dedicated system to constantly monitor these objects and track them by using ground-based radars and optical telescopes. ISRO has conducted several collision avoidance maneuvers in the recent past to protect our space assets, which are national assets. Many of our satellites and even launches have been maneuvered to avoid direct collision with known space debris particles. It has also set up a dedicated center for research and development. Under ISRO, there is a Center for Space Debris Research, which is focused on not just monitoring the space debris, but it is designing and developing strategies and technologies to mitigate and even remove space debris in the future. So there is a dedicated tracking project called Project Netra. Project Netra of ISRO is an early warning system for any kind of hazard in outer space which could threaten our satellites and missions, and Please make a note of these Indian initiatives. It's very, very important for prelims and even for your mains. So Project Netra is a tracking initiative. It's an early warning system essentially that detects any hazards and threats for Indian space assets in outer space. So coming to the strategy to track, classify, mitigate and remove, there are few global programs which are already underway. For example, NASA is already in an advanced stage of coming out with technologies that can clean up space debris. Same with the Clean Space Initiative of European Space Agency. They are testing out various technologies which can present a viable option, right? A optimal option through which space debris can be cleared and removed. So the first priority here when it comes to space debris management is to detect and characterize the space debris. That is the first step. First, you should have the ability to detect the space debris and you have to characterize it depending on its size, right? You have to track its orbit, track the speed at which it is moving, and even possibly predict its future path, its future orbit. So detecting and characterizing is the first step where you create a database, right, by using various technologies. So you would need ground-based radar systems and even space-based tracking systems along with optical telescopes and advanced algorithms which can autonomously track these objects, detect them, classify them, and keep a constant watch on them. So continuously tracking them is the second step. Using the same set of tracking systems, you need to constantly maintain surveillance to ensure that every object is assigned a certain name, a certain designation, and you constantly monitor its path, predict its future path as well, so that it helps in planning out risk mitigation strategies. It will help not just NASA, but it will help other space agencies as well to plan their collision avoidance maneuvers, or at least to avoid these threats in the coming days. Then finally, the last step is remediation, where you plan to deploy certain technologies through which you can clear or remove the space debris. If you're wondering what kind of technologies are available to do that, laser is one option which is being considered. Using laser, right, advanced lasers, both ground-based and space-based lasers, you can blast an energy beam, a directed energy beam, to give a small nudge, to give a small push to these objects. So you deflect its path, you deflect it from its orbit, and thus force the object to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in a largely controlled manner. So this is something which is being tried out. There are many other options as well, such as physically removing these objects through a dedicated mission. Maybe a spacecraft can be sent which can physically nudge or push these objects, or at least collect these objects and bring them back to Earth. Even that is an option being considered. Or a dedicated rocket which is launched to target and remove some of the space debris. So these are various options being considered, either for a controlled recovery or at least uncontrolled re-entry into the atmosphere so it can burn up in the atmosphere itself. So many such technologies are being tried out around the world, and India is also not far behind. So going forward, the priority for all the spacefaring countries is to improve their tracking and monitoring, ensure that we don't miss any large debris object, and focus on better technologies. For example, reusable launch vehicles. This will considerably bring down the space debris that we are contributing to. Look at the reusable launch vehicle which SpaceX has developed, right? Even ISRO is working on such technologies where we can recover some of the components of the launch vehicle and reuse them so that you are reducing the waste that we are contributing. And the other option is to use better materials to improve your design, improve your manufacturing, so that no components are lost in space. Make the materials more durable. Ensure that the smallest of component doesn't fall off, including paint particles or metal particles. They should not scrap off during a launch. And ensure that larger objects like the spent stage of a fuel tank, right, or a defunct satellite, they should be deorbited in a timely manner and in a safe manner. So all these measures can be taken up in the upcoming missions to ensure that our contribution to space debris is mitigated. So in this regard, ISRO has registered a big success. One of its recent mission, the XPOSat mission, it has been labeled as a zero-orbital debris mission. ISRO has ensured that the mission doesn't contribute to any space debris. So let's see how ISRO has done this, and that is the last point under this topic. XPOSat, which was launched earlier this year in January 2024, was a unique mission in itself. It essentially carried a couple of payloads which help in X-ray polarimetry to study neutron stars and other magnetrons and celestial objects. It's a one-of-its-kind mission, right? India becomes the second country after the US to have such a X-ray-based polarimetry experiment to be stationed in outer space. It improves our understanding of neutron stars and other celestial objects. So here the important point is not about the mission itself. It's not about XPOSat. But what ISRO did with the launch vehicle after XPOSat was placed in orbit. The launch vehicle used here was the PSLV, which is India's most reliable launch vehicle, right? The 4-stage PSLV was used. After XPOSat was injected into the desired orbit, the 4th stage of the PSLV, instead of just casting it out, instead of just leaving it in outer space, it was redesigned, it was modeled to continue and perform an orbital experiment. In fact, ISRO had tested such a technology back in 2019 itself. In 2019, ISRO had demonstrated the reuse of the last stage, the 4th stage of the PSLV rocket. This technology had been demonstrated in 2019 and it was put to use in the XPOSat mission launched earlier this year. So basically, after injecting XPOSat into the desired orbit, the 4th stage remained active. It had a set of solar panels attached to it, which could provide the required power. It also carried a lithium-ion battery on board to generate the required power. And on board this 4th stage of the rocket, there were many experiments that were placed. So the 4th stage of PSLV continued to orbit in a pre-designated orbit, right? It was not just a waste object floating around. It was serving a scientific purpose by performing orbital experiments. So this payload was called POEM-3, PSLV Orbital Experimental Module 3. So after remaining in orbit and after performing all these orbital experiments, the 4th stage of the rocket has successfully been deorbited. It has re-entered the Earth's atmosphere, and ISRO ensured that not even a single piece is left behind. It ensured that the fuel tank is made passive, so it doesn't explode during re-entry, because any such explosion would have released hundreds of debris particles. But it had passivated the fuel tank, right? This was a design change that had been done. So during re-entry, there was no such explosion. It successfully carried out a controlled re-entry, and it has been deorbited back into the Earth's atmosphere. So this is one of India's biggest achievements, because we have not only reused a part of the rocket and thus increased its shelf life, but we've also ensured that the mission was a zero debris mission. So that is what is significant about this development, and that is exactly what the article is talking about. ISRO tracked the orbital module and its re-entry through its tracking stations, because the 4th stage of this rocket was equipped with navigational and command control systems as well. It was not just a regular ordinary rocket stage. It had its own power supply, plus it had its own navigation, guidance and control system with a communication link to the ground stations in India and around the world, and as well as to the Navik constellation of satellites, which is India's own navigational satellite constellation. So As a result, the entire orbital experiment was tracked, monitored through ISRO's tracking stations present around the world. We have tracking stations in Mauritius, in Brunei, across India as well, right? And also in Indonesia, at the island of Biak. So all these telemetry tracking stations of ISRO constantly kept a watch on the last stage of the rocket as it performed the orbital experiments, and it was successfully deorbited and brought back, thus leaving behind zero debris in outer space. So that is what we understand from this important article. It is a big topic because there are many prelims related topics that we have covered. You can expect prelims questions based on that, and of course you can even get a mains question in GS paper 3. So I hope everything is understood. Now let's look at the next column from the same page. On page 10 we have a column related to electoral transparency from our candidates, from our political candidates. Now this is a topic we had discussed in one of our previous sessions as well, but I would like to explore the topic in slight detail because the article is actually providing some very useful information which can help us in GS paper 2 under polity. See, now that elections have been announced, the political parties, they have fielded their respective candidates, and these candidates are now filing their nominations, right? So when filing a nomination, candidates are mandatorily expected to file an affidavit according to the Representation of People Act and the Conduct of Election Rules. They have to file this affidavit with the returning officer, with the electoral officer of the concerned constituency, and in the affidavit, they have to specify certain basic details. Basically, they have to inform the voters if they have a criminal background, if they have any criminal history or criminal antecedents. They should also declare their assets, their income, their savings, not just their own financial status, but even that of their dependents, right? Whatever movable, immovable assets that they have, whatever investments they have made in the stock market, for example, right? So all the financial information regarding a candidate should be shared in the affidavit so that voters know about their candidates. Voters should make a well-informed choice. They should know whether their candidate has a criminal history. Have they been charged with criminal offenses? Have they been jailed anytime in the past? Right? Do they have a criminal record? Right? What is their financial status? What is their sources of income? What investments have they made? Not just in their own name, but also in the name of their dependents. So that you know that the candidate is as clean as possible, and based on that you can make an informed choice. So this is part of the nomination process. When candidates are filing the nomination, they have to submit the affidavit as well. But in this regard, recently, there have been some developments. The Supreme Court recently held that candidates also have a right to privacy. If you remember, we discussed this just a few days ago. Under the prelim section, I had actually discussed this. I mentioned the provision as well that the Supreme Court highlighted while passing this ruling. The Supreme Court said candidates need not share every insignificant information. For example, there was one candidate from Arunachal Pradesh, right, who had filed in the affidavit details regarding the bikes, the cycles he had purchased, and few political opponents had targeted that candidate by questioning that candidate that he had not revealed a few bikes he had purchased before. Now, according to the Supreme Court, this was insignificant information and very personal information belonging to that candidate. The Supreme Court said candidates also have a right to privacy to an extent. Of course, voters have a right to know, right? There is a need for electoral transparency amongst our candidates. But at the same time, the Supreme Court said candidates need not disclose everything, especially insignificant information. Information which is not significant, which is not related to their criminal record or which is not related to their financial status, need not be disclosed. And the Supreme Court said candidates have a right to privacy in this regard. So this will not be seen as a violation of Representation of People Act. And in another development, the Election Commission has started an inquiry into the affidavit submitted by Rajiv Chandrasekhar. Rajiv Chandrasekhar is a BJP candidate, a minister as well in the Modi government. So few questions have come up about the financial status of Rajiv Chandrasekhar. So there are questions concerning his income and his savings and investments. So based on these concerns, the Election Commission has asked the Central Board of Direct Taxes and the IT department to conduct an inquiry into the affidavit that was submitted by Rajiv Chandrasekhar. It's in this context that the Hindu has brought out this article. The Hindu is exploring, right, the various laws and provisions that we have with regard to transparency about our candidates and information related to our candidates, and whether these processes, are they really effective? Is it really helping the voters to get all the information needed about their candidates? Or are the candidates being really honest about the affidavits that they are submitting? Or are they concealing some information? Are they concealing their actual wealth? Are they falsifying the affidavit? And if they falsify or if they hide some information, are there any consequences? So that is what the article is exploring. And the article is also looking at various recommendations regarding these procedures and how we can bring more transparency into our elections and how we can push our candidates to become more transparent. So let's examine this quickly. First, let's look at the law. Let's see what the law says. Under Section 33 of RPA, Representation of People Act, and if you club this with rule number 4A of the Conduct of Election Rules, it is stated that a contesting candidate, while filing their nomination, they have to mandatorily submit an affidavit. Basically, it's a self-attested, notarized document where the candidate declares that this is my criminal past. Or if they don't have a criminal past, they have to state that they have no criminal antecedents. They have to reveal their income, their sources of wealth, all the investments they have made, all the savings they have, not just in their own name, but in the name of their dependents as well. So it's a self-attested document, a notarized document, affidavit that they submit to the electoral authorities. This information will be made available in the public domain. Election Commission will reveal and share this information publicly so that voters know about their candidates. Voters know about the criminal history of the candidate, the financial status of the candidate, before deciding to cast their vote in favor of this candidate. In this regard, there is a very important ruling of the Supreme Court passed in 2002 in the ADR case. ADR is a research institution, a think tank, a civil society organization that works in the field of electoral reforms, Association of Democratic Reforms, or ADR. So in the ADR versus Union of India case, the Supreme Court said voters have the right to know about the criminal antecedents and as well as the income details and asset details of their candidates along with their educational qualification. So a candidate cannot lie, cannot falsify the information regarding these details. When they are filing their nomination and submitting the affidavit, they can't conceal any information, they can't falsify, they can't hide certain information. The Supreme Court also took a stand in this regard and stated that candidates have to be honest, they have to be transparent here, and if not, there will be consequences. So to bring this into effect, Section 33A was added to the Representation of People Act, which requires the candidates to mandatorily disclose any criminal past, any criminal antecedents that they have. So what happens if they don't transparently share the information? Let's say a candidate has deliberately given wrong information. Let's say they're deliberately concealed a part of their wealth. Or let's say they have falsified the records and they're giving false information to the Election Commission and to the voters. If any such malpractice is detected, then those candidates are liable for punishment under Section 125A of the Representation of People Act. So any attempt to conceal or falsify the information or not submitting the information at all will lead to punishment with imprisonment up to 6 months or a fine or both. So that is the punishment. the candidate can be sent to jail for 6 months along with a fine. Now, the argument of the writer is that this punishment is not enough. It's not sufficient to deter the candidates from providing wrong information, right? So that is why the writer is saying that there is a need to consider the issues of transparency with regard to these affidavits, and there is a need to bring some electoral reforms over here. Because recently there have been these incidents where questions have come up about the genuineness of the affidavit submitted by the candidates. If you take up the case of Rajiv Chandrasekhar and other candidates recently, there are questions about their real income, their status. There are few other candidates who have a criminal past, but they have concealed it. They have not revealed that in the affidavit. So these instances where candidates are not transparent, they are not honest, right? That defeats the very purpose of having these provisions. So that is why there are some recommendations that we need to consider. The Law Commission of India and also the Election Commission of India, they both have given a set of recommendations in the past to bring more transparency with regard to our candidates. The Law Commission, in its 244th report that dealt with electoral disqualifications submitted in 2014, and the Election Commission of India, which brought out a report on electoral reforms in 2016, they both supported a set of recommendations to bring more transparency with regard to these affidavits. The first and most important recommendation is that the punishment given is not enough. The punishment has to be increased to create a stronger deterrent. They have recommended that instead of just 6 months of jail under RPA for failing to submit the information or concealing or falsifying the information, the jail term should be increased to 2 years instead of just 6 months. A 2-year jail term can become a strong deterrent. It will push the candidates to be transparent. And they have also recommended that this should be a ground for their disqualification. Let's say they have been elected, they become a MP or a MLA, and later it is revealed that this candidate had falsified the information given in the affidavit, or they had concealed some information in the affidavit. And if the charges are proven, they should be disqualified. It should be a ground for disqualification. In the Indian Constitution, we have constitutional provisions which lays the ground for disqualification of elected MPs and MLAs. So both Law Commission and Election Commission of India have supported this. They have argued in favor of increasing the jail term to 2 years in case of violations and to treat this as a ground for their disqualification after their election. It's also been suggested that these trials should be heard on a day-to-day basis to provide for quick judgment and deliver justice as quickly as possible, right? They have called for regular trials on a day-to-day basis. And finally, they have also recommended that if there is a candidate with a criminal history who has been charge-sheeted, convicted with at least 5 years of prison term, they should be debarred from contesting elections. This is one of the recommendations. Such candidates should not be worthy of contesting elections. They should be debarred from even filing the nomination itself. So these are the recommendations of two important bodies. One is a constitutional body. And in the Public Interest Foundation case in 2018, the Supreme Court had said that it's an obligation on all the parties and the candidates to declare their criminal antecedents. Supreme Court also has made this a mandate. They can't conceal their criminal past, their criminal history. Now, let us see what the writer is suggesting. These recommendations have not been implemented, of course. So let's see what can be done as a way forward. The writer says that debarring candidates who have a criminal history, who have been imprisoned for 5 years or more, or who have been convicted for such offenses, right? Even if charge sheet has been filed against them, let's say, just because on that ground, if you debar them from contesting elections, there is a risk of this being misused by the political opposition. What if false cases are filed? Let's say a ruling party, which can control the police and investigating agencies, what if false cases are filed right before elections, charge sheet is filed, and the prosecution is seeking a 5-year jail term? If it is a falsified case, then it will disrupt the conduct of free and fair elections. Right? Of course, there is a system of checks and balances in the recommendation given by the Law Commission and the Election Commission. They have suggested that the case, if it is filed at least 6 months before the election, and then if charge sheet has been filed and if they are being convicted in a court, only then they should be debarred from contesting elections. But again, there is no guarantee that this provision may not be misused. The political opposition might file false charges and push for quick investigations as well and quickly file a charge sheet and seek a jail term of 5+ years. So this could disrupt the conduct of free and fair elections. So the writer is not supportive of debarring the candidates from the election itself, because there is a bigger risk of the provision getting misused, especially by the ones who are in power. However, the writer strongly supports the other two recommendations, which is to increase the punishment to 2 years and to treat this as a ground for disqualification, and as well as the mandatory submission of the criminal records of the candidates. The writer is completely supportive of the Supreme Court's judgment in the 2018 case and the recommendations of Law Commission and Election Commission that mandates the candidates to reveal the correct information, or else they will face a higher punishment, a stricter punishment, a punishment of up to 2 years in jail, along with this being treated as a ground for disqualification. So the writer says this is a more appropriate measure. This could be a way forward to introduce more transparency in our elections and in the process of filing affidavits by our electoral candidates. This will give us more information about our candidates, and we as voters can make a well-informed choice, which is the bedrock of any constitutional democracy. So that is what we understand from this important article. Now let's take up another important column from page number 9 that's related to science and technology. With regard to cancer treatment, there has been a major breakthrough in the recent past. I'm sure many of you would know how horrible cancer can be, right? And how difficult treatment of cancer is, and how expensive it is as well. And there are no such specific cures for a variety of cancers. But with regard to a few blood-related cancers, those which fall under the category of leukemia, lymphoma type of cancers, there is a revolutionary therapy which has come out, which has been successfully tested. It's been approved for commercial usage around the world and as well as in India. I'm referring to CAR T-cell therapy. It's one of the biggest breakthroughs in the field of medical science in the recent years. CAR stands for chimeric antigen receptor T-cell therapy. So this is a therapy which has been approved for commercial usage in the US. The US FDA, which is the drug regulator in the US, has approved 5 different types of commercial CAR T-cell therapies to be used for treating cancer patients. Imagine this can treat cancer, few specific types of cancer, essentially blood-related cancers like leukemia, lymphoma, etc. In India as well, we have developed an indigenous CAR T-cell therapy. Indian institutions with IIT Bombay and few private companies and Tata Memorial Hospital, which is a pioneer in cancer treatment, collectively have brought out India's own CAR T-cell therapy, which was recently approved not just for clinical trials but for commercial usage. Clinical trials in India have given a very positive result with very minimal side effects, and it has been recently approved for commercial usage by the Central Drug Standard Control Organization. In India, the drug regulator is CDSCO, Central Drug Standard Control Organization. It has approved the usage of this commercial CAR T-cell therapy, and commercially it is now available in India. So let's understand the basics here. From a prelims and mains point of view, let's understand what exactly is CAR T-cell therapy, how does it work? See, T T cells are a part of our immune system. It's a part of our immune system, and it is found in your white blood cells, in your WBCs. Now, what do WBCs do? They basically look out for foreign bodies and their antigens. The moment they detect a foreign body which could pose a threat to us, they launch an antibody response, which we call as the immune response, and they fight against these foreign bodies. Right? That is how our immune system can fight back against various pathogens, infections, diseases, etc. Now, what if we can engineer the WBCs to target the cancerous growth? Right? Cancerous cells which are forming, right? It is essentially a threat to the body. What if the immune system itself is trained to detect the cancerous growth and as a foreign body and launch an immune attack or immune response to destroy the cancer cells? That is the whole idea behind this. So the T cells, which are part of your immune system found in your WBCs, they are clinically extracted from the cancer patient. From the patient's blood, the WBCs are extracted and T cells are separated in a lab. Then a small genetic modification is done to the T cell. A genetic modification is done in the lab where a synthetic receptor is attached, which is nothing but a type of protein called the CAR, C-A-R, chimeric antigen receptor. This protein structure which is added to the T cell, it gives it the ability to detect the antigen of the foreign body, of the particular type of cancer which the patient is suffering from. Now, these modified T cells are injected back into the patient. The patient will be undergoing chemotherapy, right? And along with that, when the modified T cells, which now have the chimeric antigen receptor added to it, if this is injected back into the patient, these T cells will detect the cancerous growth, treat that as a foreign object, and they mount an immune response. Essentially, you're giving your T cells the ability to detect the cancerous growth, treat that as a foreign object, and release the antibodies to fight against the antigens. So that is exactly what is done in CAR T cell therapy. So this immune response will fight back against the cancerous cells, and in several cases of clinical trials which have been done in the last few years, there has been a tremendous success. Imagine cancer being treated in this way, right? It is indeed the biggest revolution to have happened in the field of medicine in the past few years. Now the problem here is it's very, very expensive. Especially the CAR T cell therapies available abroad in Western countries, in US in particular. It's very, very expensive. It is unaffordable even for the richest of rich people. But the Indian variant, which has now been approved for commercial release, is much cheaper compared to the variants available abroad. All right. But however, even the one approved in India, the indigenous CAR T cell therapy of India, even that is very expensive. It will cost anywhere between 40 to 45 lakh rupees. Compared to American prices, it is relatively cheaper in India because it's an indigenous therapy that has been developed, right? But it is still cost prohibitive. Poor people, the common man, even the middle class people cannot afford CAR T cell therapy as of now. But going forward, with the right support from the government and with greater commercialization of the treatment, there could be hope for cancer patients suffering from various blood-related cancers like leukemia and lymphoma, where they might see a cost-effective option being developed. But however, there are some side effects which have been noted, and you should be familiar with this. Some of the side effects include a cytokine reaction. See, any treatment responds in a different way from one person to another, right? Each body responds differently. In some cases of clinical trials and commercial usage, the researchers have noted one major side effect which is a possible cytokine reaction. Essentially, your immune system goes into a overdrive. We call this an inflammatory response, right? Where the immune system starts attacking the body itself. It starts attacking the healthy cells as well, right? And it's called an inflammatory response. It's a overdrive of your immune system where it will attack the healthy cells as well, and it's a fatal condition. It can be fatal as well. The other side effect noted is neurotoxicity. In some patients, neurotoxicity has been observed, but in majority of the patients, the therapy has been very successful. Few patients have been treated and cancerous growth has been completely eliminated with CAR T cell therapy. So that is what you should know about this. You don't have to go into all the scientific details. UPSC is not expecting you to be a researcher. You just need the basic understanding. What is CAR T cell? How does it work? What are T cells? Right? What's the cost comparison between India and US? What's the affordability of the therapy in India? Right? And what's the regulatory authority? What does the government say about this? So these are the general things that you need to understand with regard to these topics. So this completes my detailed discussion of all the mains related articles. Now let's look at the prelims section. Let's quickly go through the smaller articles in today's newspaper. On page number 1 and also on page number 12 in the business section, we have 3-4 articles today related to the Asian Development Bank or ADB. The ADB has brought out an assessment about the Indian economy. The assessment itself is not too important for us, but at least knowing what is ADB, what does it do, right, is very important for your prelims examination. In this assessment, ADB is talking about India's projected growth, India's projected GDP numbers, along with the inflation situation in India, and it's examining other macroeconomic factors of the Indian economy. So let's understand what is ADB, what does it do? The basic facts about ADB. It's a multilateral development bank that was established in 1966. All right, it's headquartered in Manila in Philippines. It's headquartered at Manila in Philippines. And even though the name says Asian Development Bank, its members are not just Asian countries. There are non-Asian members as well. Please remember this. If you look at the membership, there are several Asian countries which are members of this development bank. There are a few other non-Asian countries as well from outside of this region who are also members of the ADB. So membership is not restricted to Asian economies, despite what the name says. So just like any other developmental bank, it provides loans. It provides developmental assistance to the member countries to invest in key projects, be it infrastructure projects or socio-economic developmental projects. Is that clear? So within the ADB, you should know the top shareholders as well. Japan and United States are the largest shareholders at ADB. That's very interesting. The US is not an Asian power, right? It's a non-Asian country, but still the US is one of the largest shareholders at ADB along with Japan. Then China is the next biggest shareholder. Then we have India. India is the third largest shareholder, followed by Australia. So just remember these 4 countries and the shareholding that they have. Now this is a little important because in the past, when India has tried for ADB loans for certain projects in Arunachal Pradesh, China has often blocked the funding for India. In Arunachal Pradesh, India had planned a few hydropower projects for which funding was supposed to come from ADB. Similarly, in Ladakh, few developmental projects were planned and ADB was supposed to finance them. But when such projects are brought up at ADB, China usually blocks the funding by pointing out that these are disputed territories. So it brings our border dispute at ADB and escalates this against India. So that is something that we have faced. It's a challenge that we have faced at ADB. Is that clear? So the shareholding does play a role in how the loans and investments are approved, and India has a significant shareholding, but China often creates blockades for India. Next, on page number 3, we have an article referring to the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary. There has been a forest fire in Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary. It's quite common during this time of the year, during peak summer when heat wave conditions are present around the country. These wildfires are quite common in India's forests and protected areas. But problem is these fires can spread uncontrollably. They can destroy large areas of forest, contribute to emissions and pollution, and more importantly, it destroys the biodiversity. Several animals, birds, and other species could get killed. So this forest fire that broke out in Wayanad has destroyed around 100 hectares of forest land, which is protected. So let's understand a little more about this protected area, where it is located, why is it significant. The Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary is in the Wayanad district of Kerala, and it is seen as part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. This is where it is located in northern Kerala, essentially, right? And it's present near the tri-junction of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. So this is where we have one of the most important protected areas of India, the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. It's a contiguous habitat which includes other protected areas such as the Bandipur and Nagarhole National Park and Tiger Reserve of Karnataka and the Mudumalai National Park and Tiger Reserve of Tamil Nadu. So these habitats are all contiguous, connected with each other, and it is home to several threatened species, from the Indian elephant to the tiger, leopards, the Indian bison, gaur, and many other threatened species can be found over here. And Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary is an integral part of the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. So there are important species present over here, and part of the Kabini River that flows in Karnataka, in Nagarhole, also flows through Wayanad. Wayanad is also part of the catchment area of the Kabini, which is one of the tributaries of the Kaveri River, right? And also in Wayanad, you find many tribal communities. It's a tribal district. Several tribal Adivasi communities are found here, which are forest-dwelling tribes. So please note down the names of these indigenous communities found in Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary. Based on these details, you can anticipate a prelims question. Coming to the next article, from page number 8. The article is referring to the Battle of Saraighat, the legendary naval battle of Saraighat, fought in 1671. The article is basically referring to the then leader of the Ahom kingdom in Assam, Lachit Borphukan. Lachit Borphukan led the Ahom kingdom in this battle against the Mughals. The Mughals were trying to expand their control towards the northeast region by defeating the Ahom kingdom, right? And it led to a legendary naval battle on the Brahmaputra River. Near today's Guwahati, on the Brahmaputra, the Battle of Saraighat was fought between the naval forces of the Mughals and the Ahom kingdom. Even though the forces under Lachit Borphukan was a very small force compared to the might of the Mughals, they managed to defeat the Mughals, and it cemented the position of the Ahom kingdom, which continued to rule this region, that is today's Assam region. So that is one important historical fact that we can take away from this article. Coming to the last article for today, on page number 8, we have an article referring to the Integrated Defense Staff, or IDS. See, this article is basically talking about the defense budget, the capital budget essentially, which is assigned to the three armed forces of India. If you look at our defense budget, there is a certain capital allocation given to all the three armed forces. The capital allocation, right, or the capital side of the budget, is what helps in creating assets, long-term assets. It's through the capital a budgetary allocation that the forces can procure modern military equipment to modernize the armed forces. So Indian Army, the Navy and the Air Force, all the three, they get a certain budgetary allocation for capital expenditure, right? Not just for recurring expenses, which is your current expenditure like paying salaries, pensions, regular maintenance, logistics, etc. But capital allocation is for procuring new assets, creating new assets. Now, every now and then there is a problem here because sometimes these funds get exhausted. When a separate allocation is made for the Army, Navy and Air Force, there have been instances where the Army might have fully utilized its capital allocation. Navy also might have spent everything which has been allocated to it, but the Air Force might be left. It might still have the capital budget which was assigned because it has not spent the entire amount. Now, let's say the Army felt a critical need. Let's say a new challenge came up in a border area and it urgently needs a certain procurement to be done, but it has exhausted its funds. It would have to wait for the next budgetary cycle, go through the entire approval process to get another round of allocation. This was slowing down defense procurement, defense modernization, and it was a very inefficient way of handling the capital allocation in the defense budget. Now, recently, a major change has been done by the Defense Ministry. The MOD has come out with a consolidated defense budget. It has come out with a consolidated allocation for capital expenditure. Now, instead of giving separate allocation for three forces and facing this situation where two forces have completely spent the money, whereas one force is still left with some amount, which otherwise could have been used for urgent procurements for the other forces. Now, this is possible with a consolidated budget. The Defense Ministry has consolidated the capital expenditure. Now, let's say the Air Force has a sudden requirement. It has already spent all its capital allocation, but there are funds still available with Army or Navy. That can be utilized by the Indian Air Force. It can be diverted towards the Indian Air Force for meeting an urgent requirement. And that is the advantage of a consolidated defense budget. That's what the article is talking about. The article is mentioning that there is no shortage of capital funds because now that the defense services budget has been consolidated, the Indian Air Force has sufficient capital to continue its requirements and urgent procurements. Now, the article is mentioning one institution called IDS, Integrated Defense Staff. So let's understand what is it. The IDS is a tri-service institution. It brings the three services together, the Army, Navy and the Indian Air Force. All of them have their own service headquarters in New Delhi, right, which looks after the cadre management, the operational strategies and tactics of the respective armed forces. But the three services come together with regard to jointness and integration, right? They come under this tri-service institution called Integrated Defense Staff. If you remember, I mentioned this yesterday as well, because now it is under the command of the CDS, the Chief of Defense Staff. So IDS plays a very important role in consolidating the three armed forces. It essentially acts like a unified command center and headquarters for the three forces. And when it comes to joint service related issues, be it procurement, strategies, operational issues, etc., IDS plays this role in building synergy between the three forces. So under IDS, there are important institutions that have been set up. For example, the Defense Cyber Agency for cyber warfare, the Defense Space Agency for space warfare, the Armed Forces Special Operations Division that brings all the special forces together, the Para-SF of Army, Marcos of Navy, Garud, Commandos of Air Force. They're all brought under one single tri-services division, a special forces division called the Armed Forces Special Operations Division. So all such tri-service branches operate under the IDS, under the Integrated Defense Staff. All right. So please know the role of this institution. It could be important for security related topics under GS paper 3. So this brings my discussion to an end. Please look at the practice questions for today. Take the questions down, write an answer to it, and please post the answers in the comment section below. So that is it for today. I hope you guys have liked the session. If you did, please press the like button. If you understood everything, let me know in the comments, and without fail, subscribe to our channel. So I'll see you tomorrow. Till then, take care. Have a good day.